Cole and I have spent a lot of time over many episodes bashing the heck out of AI. But what if we actually had something that kind of works? I'm not going to necessarily say perfect, but it's a lot of potential. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about coding, building something using AI. And I got to tell you, where there's a lot of issues and a lot of different ways that we use AI, this is the one that has the most potential. If this is a topic that interests you, go ahead and join me as we start discussing. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're being joined by Chad as we talk about, well, Cole, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about a topic that Chad is very familiar with. It is known as web development and the intersection of web development and AI, actually. So it's funny because I feel like the last few episodes we've, kind of laid into AI a little bit with it's been like, videos and images and the Super Bowl. That was a fun one. But, with when it comes to web development, actually, we were just talking about like there's a lot of opportunity to use AI for web development because so like pattern based, recognition based like that. So yeah, that's what we're talking about here today.
Okay. And that, Chad, I guess that's probably true. You probably know a little bit about coding and
Just
stuff.
maybe a little, yeah.
Yep. And that, well, I agree. I mean, I think that it's one area that I see that AI can actually excel because AI is, or well, coding is all about patterns and practices. Otherwise, if you're building a function, if you're building an app, if you're building anything, it's kind of the pattern. And, though there's sometimes different ways and different styles to code, overall you're doing the same thing.
That's very true, and I think there's plenty of content out there for uh, LLMs to search and match those patterns, and a lot of good practices that are repeated. So it's a pretty recognizable thing that you can put together.
Yeah. I mean, we use it some internally
Mhm.
and that to be able to do things, especially if you're creating like maybe like a complex calculation or like repetitive task type of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but okay, like the narrative pushed that I've at least been seeing in commercials and whatnot is like all you really need to know is like an idea of what you want, and then boom, a website's coded for you. I mean, okay, Chad, how do you feel about that? Because as an over, it's like, man, like,
How do you feel about that, Chad?
Yeah. How do I feel about it? I would love to tell uh, AI what I want and then just have it build it for me. I feel like I'd have a lot more free time during the day. Um, but I think that its strength doesn't necessarily lie in building everything for you because there's still, uh, you know, unless you wrote a 20-page description about what you wanted, I'm still not sure you'd get exactly what you want. Um, But I think it helps in generating code that you can work with if you know what you're looking at and how to update it. Um, that's a huge push, just that generation of uh, of code blocks um, to get on to your project.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think is very interesting that I've seen a lot, as I was kind of researching this, and just to let everybody know, back in the day, I did code, so I do have some familiarity with this. But is also from a testing standpoint, like looking at your code for efficiency, finding things in there because we all know that when you start out, if you build just like a 10-line app, that's fine. You're good, but everything grows and grows and grows. I mean, we've talked about it, like looking at like style sheets and kind of looking for inefficiencies and that kind of stuff, and coding files and that. And I think there's a lot of opportunity about it. But you're right. I mean, the one part that again, when we start talking about the testing, will prove is that you can't just say, "Hey, here's what I want," and it gives it to you.
Yeah, so I personally don't code, But I feel like if I did rely on AI to fully code, like it would be like, a lot of instances of a prompt and then a response or a prompt and a response. And how soon before it just becomes this mess of not answers, but like generated code that there's not like an organized kind of like system for it, right? I mean, that seems like it would be an issue with because when you're coding as a developer, I imagine you have like a library of different assets and whatnot. I feel like there's just a lot of considerations that need to be made still when you're having and I mean think about how many like websites and apps are out there right now that are like vibe coded as the people say. Um,
I
so yeah, no, there's like a lot of stuff to still be thinking about here, but it certainly lowers the barrier of entry here with AI. Um, for if you do want to code something, but obviously very important to have a knowledge base of your own as you're looking at it and reviewing what it gives you.
Yeah, I think one of the opportunities there is, I mean, you take in obviously one of the tools we're going to talk about is GenSpark, but you take that commercial that we talked about in the Super Bowl where they kind of did like, I just created this kind of app and I just created that kind of app in there. Well, you know what? Honestly, if you had an idea and you kind of had some specifications for it, and it was something you were using internally where maybe you don't have a lot of expectations about how well it works, might be a great opportunity. But as we kind of find with everything AI, when you're looking to create kind of a polished product like marketing groups and public website space would want to do, it tends to leave you lacking. And there is that interesting dichotomy of, there's a lot of, we've talked about a lot of different parts of this process where it's like, well, if it gets to you 75%, 80% of the way, you can take a piece of content and do something with that and polish it and all that kind of stuff. Coding, on the other hand, I mean, the entire concept around this is about getting rid of people like Chad, I mean, that developers tend to be bottlenecks inside of organizations. And so you're always like, well, we'd like to do this, but we're waiting on our developers to get time to do it and do that kind of stuff. So if you're talking about that and somebody tries to build an app or some component for a website or something, and it doesn't build it the way they wanted it, unless that person just happens to be a coder themselves. I mean, it's not like they're gonna break open the JavaScript file and start tinkering with it and that. So, I mean, you're kind of it's a great opportunity, but at the same time, it's probably gonna have a lot more pitfalls to it for a business person trying to do that. And that's what those, kinda all the advertisements over there kinda gloss over. Well, if it's not perfect, who's gonna make it perfect? And that and there.
Yeah, I feel like this, using AI for coding as a developer is it seems like the real opportunity for me here because like you can take a lot of like the repeatable things that you do on a consistent basis and you kind of know the workflow already. You can define that and then maybe spend more time in other areas. You know.
Yeah, I would say that's my primary use of AI and coding is just generating the blocks that I know that I need. I know how to describe them. I know what the functionality needs to be. Um, and I know how to fix those things if they don't come out quite perfectly. But just typing out the lines or finding those blocks to just write the code. Sometimes there might only be a dozen lines of code to do something simple. Other times you might have 20, 40, 100, 120 plus. It keeps going the more complex you get. And just the time saving on generation is big.
It's big. But again, the important part is you know what you're doing and you can look at the code and understand it. And that's really a big
Yep.
thing. I mean, especially considering a majority of our audience is marketers and communication folks and business folks. They're not going to have that level of understanding. And if you start getting AI to generate it, and then you go to your dev and it says, well, it almost does everything, but please take this. I mean, Chad, you know how we feel when we have to look at other people's code and work with it. It sometimes it can take twice as long as doing something yourself.
Yeah, it can certainly be a maze to track down functionality if you don't know where everything is. You didn't write it, so you don't know where the pieces are, and you have to reverse engineer it basically to figure it out.
Yeah. And so the one thing I did for our tests when we tested the 3 different tools that I did not do is I did not look at, like, the quality of the code in that, 'cause I really feel like that's not really a thing for our audience that we have for this thing, but it'd be an interesting thing because, I mean, I gotta imagine that the different ones probably coded it different too. So, now it's like, well, if you're going to use that, you almost have to lock yourself into a tool you like. So at least there's some pattern to it. But I've never tried it. Like, if you do it twice, would it code it differently? Like
Mhm.
we see with a lot of other prompts that generate different responses in AI. Would you actually get different code? Could be some interesting additional things that maybe Cole will have to do down the road sometime.
Sounds good. But yeah, each tool that we did made it so Virgil, you want to introduce like the prompt that you used across in the
Yeah, I'm probably not gonna read the entire prompt because it was a relatively
yeah, it
specific
was
prompt.
pretty big
But
prompt.
basically, we kinda thought about it, and so one of the very common patterns that are out there on the web is an accordion, and for anybody who's not 100% sure of what I mean when I say an accordion, it's the drawers that open up, so a lot of times people use them for, like, frequently asked questions, and different things like that. So you have the question, and then you open up the drawer and you get the answer. And this is something that we see a lot. We do a lot for customers. And so I was kind of curious. So I basically asked it again to use that article that we had wrote many episodes ago, and said based off that and kind of grabbing the main points out of there, I said create a accordion a web component for me that use that content and made no more than like 5 question and answers in the content, made it visually appealing. That was another criteria. Made it 100% accessible in that. So we wanted that. So if people are not watching the video, we're all smiling right now at this one. And then easy to use in that. So using JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. So those are the components that I use. And obviously, feel like a broken record, but we got a mixed bag, and nobody was perfect. Nobody was really terrible either, which was kind of pleasant. I mean, we've obviously, like when we did content creation and that, we've had those that have just been terrible. So I'll say that all of them could have been used. All of them could have been adapted by a developer and fixed relatively quickly to work for us. Would we use any of them? There's probably a little bit of a question there. But from there, so the first tool I tested was Claude, and that's really because Claude is kind of becoming one of my favorite, and their stuff is just so great. I actually had a little bit of difficulty doing it because Claude has been down a lot lately in there, but Claude made the component. I was very visually appealing, and did it, but they had a couple of issues. Number one, they created the 5 drawers, but you couldn't open any of them because if they open, they automatically close. There was some issue in the JavaScript that was making the drawers close as soon as you opened them. So that from a visual side was not very good in that. And then the one area of accessibility that it completely failed in is color contrast. It used like 3 different shades of green, which I've done other things with Claude, that seems to be its go-to is these different shades of green if you don't do it. And so it was a light green on a dark green, which is just inaccessible from a color contrast standpoint. But on the other side, when we tested it with a screen reader, it was the one that did it the best. It created the panels correctly. It numbered them. It made it very easy to go through. If a panel was not open, you could not read the answer through a screen reader, which was important because that very much mimics a visual interface. So from that side, it did really well in that. But here's one of those areas, Chad. So I do this as a business person. How easy is that going to be for somebody to fix? Colors, maybe so, but the
Probably
JavaScript,
quick. JavaScript, again, depending on complexity, that could take a minute. For a smaller component like this, when we talk about just a single, uh, you know, component piece of functionality, something like that would be pretty quick. I think you'd figure out, if there's some prompt to close all the drawers or all the applications before you open the new one, maybe that got transposed or there's needs to be some sort of delay in there. Uh, but it's knowing again where to look and what, and honestly, going back on your own bugs that you've made as a developer. And I said, "Oh, I've actually done this before myself, and I know how to fix it." Um, so yeah,
Yeah, well, so unfortunately, I looked at the drawers as well, mainly for like the content side of things. Couldn't really tell what the how good the Claude content was because once you opened it, it would just close automatically. Um, but yeah, Seth and he's been on the podcast before, as our QA specialist here at High Monkey. It was very interesting to see how the screen reader responded to these
yeah,
drawers.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Second tool we did was ChatGPT, and much like what I've experienced with ChatGPT, the drawers worked. It did it. It had content in there. It was by far the most boring layout of them all. Very plain. But it also was the only one that didn't have any color contrast issues on the page, which was kind of nice. Um, and overall, it did its job to a minimal, I'll say. But it had the smoothest drawers. Using it, I wouldn't use it just because I thought it was kind of ugly. But from the screen reader side, it didn't do so well. It had a lot of problems opening the drawers and doing that kind of stuff, and it had the least amount of compliance from that side. So there were several errors on that.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the real accessibility rabbit hole when it comes to using AI for coding is because, if you're gonna have it generate a drawer that like looks all pretty and nice, and someone comes in with a screen reader that they, open the drawer, it reads the answer again, and then like you're like, oh wait, I already heard the question, reads the question again, and then you tab over and then all of a sudden you're like halfway through the content and the actual question or answer itself. It's just, kind of disorienting when that type of thing happens, as one.
well, and one of the things that this taught, and I mean, obviously been doing accessibility for a long time, but something I don't always think about is how, like Seth pointed out that the drawers weren't numbered correctly, and that can be for a screen reader very important. And so in like the Claude one, it was numbered very well. There were still improvements you could do, but overall, if you fix that animation issue in the color contrast, it was probably the most usable out of all of them. But the one that really surprised me, not only in its slickness, just in using it in that was GenSpark. I mean, you and I obviously made a lot of fun about it from their Super Bowl commercial. Um, but kind of asked the same question. Um, was really interesting to see, by far the most visual out of the three. I mean, it was the nicest looking. The animation worked. It was a little bit clunky. It kind of had a little bit of a herk jerky thing on it in there, but that's something probably that was done through would be easier to fix than not opening, closing. And that it used good colors. It did have one contrast issue, but it actually wasn't in the drawers, the accordion itself. It put some text at the bottom where it showed the source of the content. And it did it like a dark gray in the background of the page was a light gray. So that wasn't really a thing. And from a screen reader standpoint, it was kind of like halfway between the two. It almost did as good as Claude, but it didn't do as bad as ChatGPT, and it was kind of in the middle. But one of the things I thought, and I'd be interested in, if you ever do this, chat, is GenSpark gave the most interesting, like additional prompts. You know how sometimes you get done with that, and it'll sit there and say, now you could do this. or do you want me to do this? And it was like, do you want me to create a smoother animation? It's like it even knew that the animation was not good, and it said like, do you want me to make a mobile response of that, or responsive design of this, with touch friendly interactions? I mean, they were very useful things, and I think that's actually one way that AI is starting to get better is in using previous prompts and saying, "Can I improve this for you?" Which was something that,
Yeah.
was not there. But I'm curious how much you use AI to fix problems with AI.
uh, I do. I'll reprompt something if I look at it and say this is close to what I want, but I know certain pieces are missing. And again, it's it's because I know they're missing that I'm prompting. But I like those. I like that type of prompt where it says, "We have other options. You might not know about X, Y, and Z that you can do differently here. Um, so let's give you the options." That's great. Um, Smoother animations, how if it's mobile responsive, what kind of interactions that you want, etc. I think that's important because there's a lot of variability in what an accordion is, even just something that simple, how it works. Even we talked a little bit about earlier that they're probably coded different, and I can say they were just based on knowing that the screen reader didn't work on ChatGPT. How you show the content and hide the content affects screen readers and accessibility. So, yeah, reprompting, getting exactly what you want, fine tuning, um, is an important step in getting that out there.
Well, and I think that's the thing. I mean, how many times have we worked with customer that know something, but not a lot? I
Yep.
mean, this could end up being a really great solution for those people who maybe don't know how to do it or have the time to do it, but don't 100% know how to do it and don't have the time to do it. But if they needed to crack open the file and figure out how to change a color or, edit the HTML or something, they could do that. But, they don't have the knowledge to do some of that advanced stuff. So I think it's going to be on a curve. I think overall, again, when you get there, like GenSpark, and I kind of go back to that because I mean it's a tool built to build just basically around coding. I mean that's what it's used for AI, and they had a bunch of templates of like different things that other people have built. So you use those kind of things; they're probably a great. And I imagine that, any of the ones mentioned in the commercial are probably one of their templates that they have there, to be able to do that. So maybe that ends up being the other answer to this is ends up just being a community of code out there that people can do that have been refined and fixed by other people that you could use then to start building your own thing. So I mean, I think again, above and beyond every other area where we've seen just a ton of failures, we saw failures here, but I'll say that these were the least failures we've seen out of almost anything we've generated with AI. There's a lot of potential. And again, I went with a very simple, just few sentence prompt. I didn't do a lot of extra work on it, which has always been the purpose of this. But I think that we have a lot of opportunity there if you refine that and kind of figure it out more specific, but even more so after that first iteration, saw what worked, what didn't in there. So one of the things, and I just want to leave us here, that I also liked about both Claude and GenSpark is it allows you to preview it in the browser right there so that you can test it. ChatGPT produce a code, but they produce them as three separate files. So I had to create a new HTML file and copy and paste everything in there. And you had to have knowledge on how to do that. Like, where's the styles go? Where's the JavaScript go? What do you need to do there and that? So I think that ChatGPT continues to show me that they're just behind.
I think the real question is, as per the GenSpark Super Bowl commercial, will you be able to tell it, I don't want to work today, and just have it do all this stuff for you?
Yes. Yeah, probably so. So, well, anyway, great conversation. I think this was a very interesting topic. Chad, thanks for joining us as always.
Absolutely.
And thank you, everybody. And we'll look forward to talking to you next time.
Thanks all.
Just a reminder, we'll be dropping new episodes every 2 weeks. If you enjoyed the discussion today, we would appreciate it if you hit the like button and leave us a review or comment below. And to listen to past episodes or be notified when future episodes are released, visit our website at www.discussingstupid.com and sign up for our email updates. Not only will we share when each new episode drops, but also we'll be including a ton of good content to help you in discussing stupid in your own organization. Of course, you can also follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SoundCloud, or really any of the other favorite podcast platforms you might use. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time.